Government is going to be involved in our lives, unfortunately, whether we want it or not. So if we can help tailor that involvement to ways that's going to improve our lives, then I think we owe it to each other and to the other people in our communities to be able to influence government in the right direction.
Welcome to another episode of Civil Disagreement. My name's Kevin Beers. My co host, Michael Green, is not here this week. He's off doing whatever Michael Green does on his time off. But instead, we have a special guest today. His name is Zack Hurst. Zack is an electric vehicle advocate. Okay, so an electric vehicle we're going to refer to as EV. You'll hear that quite a bit. He started a business called EV Resource, and just a couple personal things about him. He's married with 3 kids, girl and 2 boys. Uh, Personally, I've known Zach since he was a little kid in Pennsylvania, believe it or not. We both ended up in Richmond, Virginia somehow and reconnected after 20 years. Uh, and anything else you want us to know about you, Zach?
That's the important things for today, I guess.
Okay. So, today we're going to be talking about electric vehicles and green energy. So, why don't we just start off with the big question? What exactly is green energy?
Sure. Well, green energy, or I like to really rephrase that as renewable energy, is really energy sources that are not going to run out. So the polar opposite, if you will, from like fossil fuel energy sources. As examples being like solar energy, tidal, geothermal, wind, those types of energy sources, typically considered to be cleaner, much cleaner than burning things like coal or natural gas.
Okay. Um, so, it, we said that you're, well, an EV advocate, but I take it you're also a renewable energy advocate?
Yeah, from a professional aspect, I definitely tend to stay focused on the transportation sector, and really pushing for the transition to electrified transportation. But from a personal standpoint, once you step back from that, I'm definitely a huge fan and proponent of green energy or renewable energy sources as the necessary alternative to the current status quo.
Okay. And just so everybody knows, I currently have solar panels on my roof. I actually, it's because of Zach here that I ended up with it.
It
Uh,
worked.
I got a battery powered lawnmower now due to Zach. I was looking for, I needed a new lawnmower and I happened to just spot the battery operated one. And I said, called him up, said, hey, what's up with these? And ended up buying one, been very happy with it. Um, so one of the things, let's see, one of the things that we've talked about is government subsidies. Now, everybody who listens to my show knows that I happen to think the government sucks at everything, and I I personally don't believe that the government should be subsidizing green energy. And I know that's kind of where you started.
It is. So, I mean, obviously, this show's civil disagreement, so we have to find
Sure,
something.
sure.
Yeah, in most areas of talking about the government, I probably would agree with you significantly that usually when government gets involved, it's not the best path forwards. The thing about looking at electric vehicles or subsidizing electric vehicles or even subsidizing more renewable energy sources is that you can't approach that in a bubble. It's I mean, the government is already here. They are already doing a lot of things, and government subsidies exist for nearly every industry that's out there. And in fact, from a global standpoint, fossil fuels are actually subsidized significantly. I believe the latest number I've seen was actually $5.2 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies across the entire globe. So not just here in the U.S., but across the top globe. And then here in the U.S., our current government actually subsidizes fossil fuels like oil, natural gas. These, I call them antiquated technologies. I mean, they are falling away. So we're literally subsidizing the past almost at a rate 10 times more than what we pay for educating our children. It's significant, but nobody wants to talk about it, and nobody usually talks about that because it's really not out there. But then when you have a tax a tax break for somebody who buys a brand new electric vehicle, and that's $7,500, suddenly everybody seems to be up in arms that, oh, we're giving away all this money to give toys to rich people. I mean, I used to hear that a lot more, but certainly that's something that is one of those massive myths and misconceptions about electric vehicles. So when it comes to government subsidies, they're already there. So are we going to subsidize something that makes us sick because of air pollution, is a source of energy that is going to run out, and ultimately props up these massive, large corporations that really do not have the best interests of the American people in mind, and allow them to use government to subsidize their industries? Or are we going to cut that off and now transition and look towards the future and making actually public health better, making our energy sources more reliable, more cost effective, and ultimately, and this is the cheesy part, making the world a better place? I know it's one of those buzz phrases, but I mean, ultimately, that's really what it's about: is making our lives better.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned there was better for the environment. I've seen all kinds of articles and videos talking about how dirty creating the batteries themselves is, the mining of whatever materials are used, how much runoff is involved in that, all the pollution that creates. That typically they conclude with the net sum gain. Net sum gain is always negative in the creation of the batteries. What do you say to something like that?
So, I mean, and I'm assuming when you're talking about batteries, you're talking about electric vehicles specifically. And
Yes.
so when it comes to the mining of the minerals that go into electric vehicle batteries, there are lots of different ways to make EV batteries. The chemistry that goes into them, the three major minerals are going to be lithium, and that's what people tend to focus on because they're called lithium ion batteries, even though the actual amount of lithium is very small. Cobalt, which is a huge issue, and we'll touch on that, and nickel. Those are the three kind of major minerals that go into the creation of EV batteries. So on the lithium front, most of the world's lithium actually is sourced from Australia and Chile. And the way it's naturally mined is it's brought up from underground with pumps in a brine. So the lithium is actually in a water solution. And then it's pumped out onto flat areas of the desert, and the water is allowed to evaporate. And then they go back in and gather up what's remaining and then refine that. Well, the big environmental impact there has much, much more to do with taking water from somewhere else. Specifically in Chile, in the desert, they don't have a whole lot of water anyway, so they're taking water away from that. But what we're realizing now is that there is lithium everywhere, or nearly everywhere. It's one of the world's it's one of the most prevalent minerals in the world. I believe it's top 20. I don't remember the exact number. So you're finding new companies being formed, even here in the United States, in Nevada, for example, or Utah, that are being able to pull lithium in more of an ethically and environmentally sound way. And before we get to the others, one thing I find always funny is it's usually the people that don't care about the environment that are always pulling the arguments against EVs as being bad for the environment.
Okay.
So that we can touch on that if you want. But to move on to cobalt, that is probably one of the worst. Because the majority of cobalt that is sourced for electric vehicle batteries, or anything really in the world, whether it be batteries for your computers and your laptops or your phones, any device that has a lithium ion battery typically had been using cobalt. Well, almost all of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they are the third worst country in the world for child labor practices. So that it's not so much an environmental thing when it comes to cobalt. It's okay, well, kids are being put to work in these cobalt mines, and that becomes an ethical issue. And it's not lost on a lot of the auto manufacturers. So you have many auto manufacturers and battery makers like LG Chem, for example, that have actually came out and said that they are working towards cobalt-free batteries entirely. And they exist. All Teslas, as an example, that are made in China with the lithium iron phosphate batteries, no cobalt. So that's something that it's a known issue, just like anything else. And then you get to nickel, and nickel is very, I mean, it's in a lot more than just EV batteries.
Sure.
So, and that's the thing. I mean, right now, EVs, of course, make up 1% to 2% globally of all vehicles that are sold new each year. So it really isn't that much of an impact now. But if people like me get our way and they become 100% of the vehicles sold, then obviously that is a huge jump in how to source these minerals in a way that's ethically correct, but then also making less of an impact on the environment. And I stress that because you're never going to eliminate an impact to the world that we live on when we're making these things. Mm-hmm. But an argument I like to make on a very broad level is the people that care about the environment the most, the tree huggers, if you will. And for the viewers, I'm not actually one of them. Believe it or not. That is not the biggest reason that I feel it's important to go to EVs. But from an environmental aspect, if you go to the people that care the most about the environment, whether they're scientists or people like you or me that are just involved and care about something, they are proponents of making the switch to renewable energy and electric vehicles. The people that are in that industry, in that world, they are the ones that arguably would be the most knowledgeable about the effects, and they are the ones that are calling for this change.
So are the batteries without cobalt? Are they cobalt? Are they as efficient, less efficient?
Changing battery chemistries changes the properties in how the battery behaves and what you can expect from it. So typically when looking at electric vehicles, most people want long-lasting batteries that are cost-efficient, that are going to be very energy dense, meaning you can pack a lot of energy into a small space or something that's lightweight. Changing battery chemistries actually gives you different advantages at the cost of some disadvantages. So lithium iron phosphate batteries, typically you can charge them quicker, but they are not as energy dense as some other types of batteries. So there's a trade-off, and that's something that all automakers that are making EVs are constantly looking at. What is the best way to make a battery for a specific use case? In China, their EV market, the mentality isn't there that they need as much range for their electric cars as we have here in the United States. A lot of people that aren't EV owners and they're not in the EV world here, they're like, oh, I need something that gets, a longer range than my gas car, 350, 400, 500 miles. Well, we don't actually need that. If the charging infrastructure is there, which admittedly, it still has some room to grow. If the charging infrastructure is there, you can get to where you need to be, even on a car that gets well, to use my own car as an example, 50 miles on the highway. Now, I don't recommend that for everybody, but it is possible. It can be done. Most new EVs coming out there now when it comes to range, at least in the United States and North America, are 200, 250, 300 mile roughly. And, you can recharge up to 80% in about a half hour or less and on your way. So that is much more important here. So the battery chemistries for vehicles that are being produced here in North America are different because we want different things out of our cars than in other markets. So it changes. I mean, Tesla uses different battery chemistries depending on what vehicles they are working on or making and selling in different markets around the globe,
Okay.
as an example.
Tesla comes out with an EV, and they're so incredibly expensive. I hear that all the time. Electric vehicles are just way too expensive. Why is that? Or will that change? What's coming down the line?
What is expensive?
Um, well, I bought my Jeep way back 2004 for 25,000.
Okay.
Let's say.
Average cost of a new car in the U.S. now, or as of last year, because the numbers came out last year, was a little bit more than $38,000. Most EVs now are going to be very, very close to that price parity or the price point where they are in line with the initial cost of a gas-powered vehicle.
Okay.
Now, they're not as, you're not going to find a $25,000 EV right now unless you look at the extreme, kind of the fringes, not the mainstream vehicle like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Camry or something like that. But there are electric vehicles that you can buy right now, today, that cost less than $20,000. One that comes to mind is the Candy K27. It's a smaller city car, great for people that would want to commute, but it's not going to be something that is going to be widely adopted. Like, for example, the best-selling electric vehicle right now is the Tesla Model 3. Well, that starts at $37,990. So that's right there at kind of the average cost of a new car in the United States. Now, people who think about electric cars being expensive are not the ones that are staying up to date with the EV world. Okay. When Tesla first came out with the Roadster back in 2008, it cost over $100,000. The Model S, when it first came out, somewhat the same. Tesla specifically had a goal to build the really expensive cars so that they could make enough money to build the least expensive cars. And they actually announced recently that they're going to be building a $25,000 brand new EV. GM, just this week actually, it's a good time for this, announced that by 2025 they're going to have 30 all brand new EV models globally, and 2/3 of those are going to be available here in North America for every single segment of new vehicle. So there's going to be an electric car at a price point for everybody if you're buying new. What I find, though, is the people that are genuinely concerned about cost, I mean, that is the variable that is preventing them from buying an electric car, I encourage them to look at used. And I'm a great example of that. I am not a rich person when it comes to money by any means.
That's kind of the definition.
Well, I'm rich in other ways.
Okay.
But I bought my EV used. It was 3 years old, 28,000 miles on the odometer for a little bit more than $11,000. The payment for the car is actually less than what I was spending on gas with my gas-powered car before I got it. I bought it purely for a financial purpose. Every month that I drove the EV and didn't drive my Civic, I was saving about $50 a month. So I got like a free car out of it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage people to go look at used EVs. It's a great option. There are specific marketplaces that are designed for only EVs, so you can not worry about having all the gas-powered vehicles cluttering up the mix. But they're all over the place, and they are great, great options for people that are concerned about price.
One of the other big complaints I hear about is when I got to replace the batteries. That's a huge cost. I don't know what huge is, but it's a huge cost. Uh, I don't want to be laying all that money out to fix a car.
Sure.
So, uh, is there a way? What does it really come down to when it? For instance, that experience is coming from the Prius, which is a hybrid. I
Mm-hmm.
understand that, but when the batteries have to be replaced, it was like $6,000 or something like that. What's the current state of?
So yeah, and that's a good question, and it's important for people, especially that are buying a used EV. It's important to keep that in mind. That is a concern where you don't worry about your engine dying typically, because usually at 100, 150, 200,000 miles or so, or some people keep their cars more than that, closer to 250 or more. At a certain point, you need to calculate, okay, well, is it worth keeping this car or trading it in or getting rid of it and getting something else? So that mentality, and I will more directly answer your question, that mentality still applies to electric vehicles. At what point does it cost too much? I'm not willing to keep this car and I'm going to get rid of it. Now, most people will probably never replace the battery in their electric vehicle. The reason being, electric vehicle batteries don't just one day fail. You don't wake up in the morning and you're getting ready to go to work and you try to turn your car on and it doesn't drive. EV batteries over time degrade, meaning the original energy capacity that it had will slowly over time reduce. And usually that levels out at a certain point. What happens is, I'll use my car as an example. It was a shorter range vehicle to begin with, and I'm currently operating with about 70% of the battery capacity that I had originally. Well, at the point where that would be lower than I'd want, I would trade the car in on, at this point, probably another one just like it. But people typically, the average length of time people keep a vehicle in the United States is 2 to 3 years, or if it's used, it's 3 to 5 years. So people don't usually keep their vehicles that long. The people that are going to worry about replacing the battery are the ones that keep the car until like forever, 10, 15, 20 years. Most manufacturers of new EVs, and this is actually a government thing, the warranty is 8 years, 100,000 miles for the EV battery and major components. So that will cover the majority of people. Should they decide that they do want to replace the battery, yeah, it'll cost thousands of dollars. My argument against that is maybe a poor one, but it's, hey, you haven't had to spend money for all of those years on oil changes, spark plugs, air filters, timing belts, water pump. None of that. It doesn't have any of those maintenance. The cost of ownership for an EV is significantly less than a gas-powered vehicle. And you're right. It did start with the Prius. The Prius batteries were not the best because, granted, that was 20 years ago when the Prius came out. Battery technology just wasn't there. There are electric vehicles on the road today with over 500,000 miles on the odometer with the original battery pack. That's possible. Furthermore, the batteries, once they're done in the car, doesn't mean that they're done. It just means that they're not great for propelling a vehicle because a vehicle is very heavy. They can be repurposed to be used for static storage or a battery backup for somebody that might have solar. And if the power goes out, they want to actually have
Mm-hmm.
energy for their home, they can have a battery backup. So there's lots more that those batteries can do. The total life of a battery for an EV is probably closer to 30 years in different forms.
Now, well, actually, let me ask this from an engineering standpoint. Do these batteries work? What's usually recommended for like your phone? Let your phone run down, computers too. Let them run down to practically zero, then charge them back up, and it prolongs the life of the battery. Is that the same for electric vehicles?
Uh, yes and no. Generally, when it comes to an EV battery, they like to be between 20% and 80% state of charge. So you don't want to let it go down all the way or charge it all the way full. There are some auto manufacturers that actually reserve with software the bottom little bit and the top little bit so that an owner of the vehicle could, even if it says 0 on the dash, it's not really 0, or 100 on the dash, it's not really 100. But generally, in terms of taking care of a battery, degradation for batteries happens with the flow of electrons. If that flow is happening faster, for example, a fast charge at a public charger, or accelerating fast, so that would be a fast discharge, which admittedly is way more fun, then the battery will degrade more quickly. So if somebody is concerned about battery longevity, like they're genuinely saying, I'm going to keep this car until it dies and I want that date to be as far from now as possible, then I would tell them, go easy on the accelerator and charge it home, plug it into a regular 110 wall outlet, charge as slow as you possibly can.
Okay. Now for me, if I'm making a longer trip, I like to pull into a gas station, fill it up, and move on.
Sure.
And I heard you mentioned earlier that the battery takes about half an hour to charge, thereabouts. Why am I wasting my time charging battery?
Sure. So it depends on the size of the battery. And actually what I mentioned earlier is if you were going from like 10% all the way up to 80%, it might take a half hour.
Okay.
The charging infrastructure is constantly getting faster. Cars are capable of charging much faster. If you use the most popular EV, the Tesla Model 3, you can actually get over 100 miles of range recharged in as little as 10 to 15 minutes on some chargers, some of the faster chargers. For my car, I just took a road trip and I was actually going from 0 to 100% because I needed to. It's a short range car. But it was taking about 15 minutes. Now, some of the slower chargers, it took like 19, almost 20 minutes. But what I found is by the time I went inside and I used the facilities, maybe grabbed a bite to eat and came back out, the car was either finished charging or really, really close to finished charging. Like that actual, I got to wait on the charger, wasn't there. And then the second part of that is, I think most people, when they are asking that question or they have that concern, are thinking like they're at a gas pump and they're holding it. Well, with an EV, you don't need to do that. You plug it in and you walk away. So here, you can walk away and go do shopping or go grab a bite to eat and use the restroom. And then by the time you come back out, it's finished and you unplug and you're on your way, versus standing there at the pump for 5-6 minutes and then taking care of all of those things. It's a much more relaxed and I hesitate to say enjoyable, but it's not a miserable experience. You're not standing out in the cold, turning your back to the wind at the gas pump, because I've been there. I know it. I mean, it's pumping gas is breathing in the fumes. It's a horrible experience that we've just grown so used to, and you don't realize how bad it is until you've lived without it. And you're like, why did we ever put up with that? And I think that's something that, for me, and I'll touch on this, that the biggest reason why I think transitioning to EVs is important, and also the biggest reason why, and this is getting back to where we do disagree, why getting the government involved, I can't believe I'm saying that, in pushing the transition to electric vehicles comes down to health and air quality. And, talking about standing at the pump, breathing fumes, you read all the warnings that are listed there on the pump. Like, guess what warning there is on an EV charger related to fire or noxious fumes? None. Well, burning things in general, I mean, you could burn wood or paper, and burning things causes a lot of health problems, not just to people that are operating the vehicles or own the vehicles, but even people that don't drive a vehicle at all, but they happen to live near a road. So the biggest concern that I have for getting government involved is because the emergency, the public health emergency, is so great when it comes to air quality and the pollution caused by tailpipe emissions. Basically, if you have a gas or a diesel car, what you're doing is poisoning all of the people around you as you're driving. Now, nobody wants to think about that. We're literally killing our kids or causing premature premature stillbirth, premature deaths, higher rate of asthma, cardiac arrest, stroke. The public health crisis that arises from tailpipe emissions is something that is much more significant than the effect to the environment, if you ask me.
Okay. Okay. Um, how about this? I see this in the news too. Batteries that explode. Now, for those of you who don't know, I actually had a computer
Yeah.
with lithium ion batteries in it, and it exploded. We actually ended up setting our office on fire. Had the fire department in there to put it out, the whole bit. They destroyed our beautiful wood desk, but it was on fire, so I guess they had to. Uh, but I seen the news, like somebody's entire garage was demolished by a battery explosion.
Hmm.
So what are you saying about that sort of thing?
Well, and I know how much of a fan of the media you are. That is going to make news because it's a new technology. So you report on that, you're going to get more clicks, you're going to get more views. But the actual reality of vehicle fires when it comes to gas-powered cars versus electric cars, gas-powered cars catch on fire 8 times more than EVs do.
Now, is that pure numbers or is that percentage wise? So, for instance, if one battery out of 10,000 explodes
Right.
versus 8
Yes.
fires
So it's
per...
it's the total number of vehicles and the ones
Okay,
of
so
that
so
bunch.
the rate is 8 times higher for gas
Yes.
powers.
But if you see a car on the side of the road, are you going to stop to film it and send that to your local news organization? Or does it make the news at all? Maybe. Maybe. But chances not. It's not special. But when an EV catches fire, then it's a big deal. And it's not to say that that's not something that's important to address, because it does happen. Chevy recently introduced a recall on the Chevy Bolt because the batteries, they found there might be a software issue that causes the batteries to overheat. Generally, EV batteries are cooled with a glycol solution, coolant, basically. Like you'd run through your engine, but it's designed for EV batteries and motors and their systems. But it happens much, much less frequently. And there are some very significant occasions. Like this week, there was a driver in Oregon who was driving his Tesla Model 3 over 100 miles an hour, crashed into a tree, and the car, I wouldn't say disintegrated, but battery cells were flung through the windows of the houses close by, and they were hot, and one of them set a bed on fire. Mm-hmm. Well, you're damn right that makes the news. And the first few news articles that I wrote were very fact-based and specific to what happened. Well, then the next day and then 2 days later, I start reading these stories. Oh, Tesla crashes and sending flaming battery cells flying into nearby houses. You're going to get that. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely going to get that. But the rate, the actual numbers are that it's much safer when it comes to fire or explosions. And the reasons that you have a lot of people thinking about laptop batteries are exploding, or the Samsung Note or whatever it was, right, that were catching on fire. These phones don't have a cooling system built into them the way the cars do. It's first of all not a liquid cooling system, thankfully. Right. I wouldn't want that in my pocket. But they're not designed the same way. Yes, they're lithium batteries, but it's a completely different chemistry. It's a completely different cell design and a completely different use case. So,
I will say
Completely different.
I just recently had to get a new phone because my old phone got hot. It actually the battery swelled up. I was wearing it on my arm on one of my walks,
Uh-huh.
and the padding was protecting me from the heat, so I didn't even know it was getting hot.
Yeah.
But apparently, it was ready to explode on my arm.
Yay.
Luckily, I took it out, and it was extremely hot, and I noticed that the case had split because the battery was swelling. Turned that sucker off right then and there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think between having a computer explode and now my phone almost exploding, I'm thinking, do I really want to get into an electric vehicle? I mean that's where my head
It's
is.
it's a natural thought process for somebody that isn't aware, and unfortunately that because that's so natural to think that way, it helps perpetuate the myth that, oh, well, it's a lithium battery, so it must do the same things.
Right.
They only last 2.5 years and they'll blow up on you.
Yeah, and the thing is, and you have to think about this too. We're going to agree on this one, but because I'm an engineer that works in computers, I'm around tons of computers all the time. So if one explodes or the batteries explode, yeah, that was a good possibility, I guess, in a sense. The odds of me being around a computer that explodes are far higher than someone like you being
Sure.
around a computer that explodes, just because I'm around computers
Right.
all the time. So that's one thing. Um, I wanted to go into this one I found fascinating. I know we've talked about this before, but let's do it in front of a camera now. Uh, a lot of auto dealers are having a hard time with electric vehicles because the model is different. In case you don't know, car dealerships do not make their money on sales of cars. They make some, of course, but that's not where they make their money. They make their money on the repairs afterwards. Now, electric vehicles, according to everything Zach has told us, uh, don't need repairs the way gasoline-powered vehicles do. So, automakers, or not automakers, but auto dealers don't want to sell electric vehicles, in my understanding, mainly because it destroys the model that they currently have. So where do they make their money on? Is it in the sale? Is it in the batteries later on? Where do they make their money?
Well, that's one of the biggest concerns that dealerships have is they're not going to make as much money. Now, a lot of them will write into the maintenance schedule for the vehicle. Oh, take it back every year and have it checked out. Like you go into the dentist for a yearly checkup, and if there's something that needs to be done, then you can go do that. Or tires. EVs will go through tires usually more quickly than gas-powered cars because they're heavier, and tire manufacturers haven't quite caught up with the material that's needed to be able to last longer for that. They're getting there. They are getting there. But generally, dealerships are going to be struggling if we make a shift to EVs 100%. And honestly, there is a case to be made for getting rid of the dealerships altogether anyway. A lot of people are ordering cars online and having them brought to them directly at the house. Carvana, which is actually where I got my car, is a great example of that. I didn't go to a dealership. I went to a web page and I ordered the car that I wanted to see. They allowed me to have a week and 400 miles to check it out, and I could give it back to them, no questions asked, if I didn't want it. So
Okay.
there are new businesses popping up to handle that type of thing. And actually, orders online for EVs, I mean, Audi with the e-tron, yes, you can go into an Audi dealership and order an e-tron, but you can go online. The Hummer, the GMC Hummer that they just recently opened ordering for, you can only order it online. Rivian with their EV pickup trucks. There are no Rivian dealerships. If you want a Rivian, you're going to their webpage and you're ordering it. And of course, Tesla, who most people are surprised to hear that they sell, as many vehicles as they do. I mean, they sell more vehicles than Porsche. Some of these dealerships that have been out there. I mean, they're not selling millions of vehicles yet because they don't have the factories for it yet. But next year, they're expected to sell more than 500,000 vehicles. Well, they don't have dealerships. Now, you can go into a Tesla showroom or a service center and take a look at the vehicle, but you're not buying it there. You're going online and you're ordering it. And actually, the experience for ordering a Tesla is less than 2 minutes. I've seen it done in 50 seconds because somebody knew exactly what they wanted. And so they just go through and they hit the options and they go through. I ordered a Tesla Cybertruck and it took me maybe 3 minutes because I wanted to really savor the experience. Because it's something that is more of an excitement. It's like you're ordering a Christmas gift versus the dread of going in and haggling with the greasy salesperson at the dealership. And I say that in jest a little bit because I have friends that work at dealerships and I'm friends with local dealerships, and I think they have a lot of work to do, if I'm going to be completely honest, that they don't want to sell EVs, but honestly, most of them couldn't, even if they did want to, because they just don't know how they work. They don't know what questions to ask the customer to help direct them towards the right EV.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I won't be sad if all the dealerships disappear. I mean, we need service centers because any mechanical device, whether it be a car or anything, is going to have parts that break or fail or require a certain amount of maintenance. So we need service centers. But do we need a dealership where you can go in and have a manufacturer's suggested price, but then, oh, we'll give you a great deal on this? Or with some EVs, because they're so new, they're actually selling them above the manufacturer's suggested retail price because there's that kind of demand for them. The Hyundai Kona being a good example. So I'd be good to get rid of dealerships if we had to.
So what you're saying is you're in favor of people losing their jobs. I'm kidding.
I am in favor of people finding jobs that are more relevant to today's society.
Oh, okay. I was taking the way I get attacked on Facebook. You know, our audience knows about the way I get it.
Sure.
Because it's like every week I bring up something new. How about the self-driving mode? I mean, Tesla's kind of made self-driving famous, but there's a problem with accidents. The fact that these self-driving cars have a lot of accidents. You're not in control of your vehicle. You don't get it. If it's going to hit something, it's going to hit it. It doesn't give you a choice. Those kinds of things. That seems to be a big fear for people when they look at electric vehicles.
So the problems with marketing. Tesla, my biggest point where I'm very critical of what they've done is with how they've labeled their driver assistance features. There is no such thing as full self-driving, but yet they have software that is titled full self-driving. Every Tesla vehicle comes with autopilot standard. Now, Elon himself has justified some of those terms, and I won't really get into that side of it, but I really want to address what you just said. There is no system out there, with the exception of maybe Waymo, which is autonomous vehicle company, their software company, basically. They're operating a fleet in a very, very small, geo-fenced locality without a driver at all. Every other system, including Tesla's, are going to be what's called level autonomy or level autonomous driving level 2, possibly 3. Now, the different levels of autonomous driving, according to the Society of Automotive Engineers, the SAE, they actually have level 0, which is no autonomous features at all, to level 5, which is you don't need a driver at all. The vehicle pilots itself in any condition anywhere in the world, which doesn't exist. Okay. So what you're finding once again is marketing, with how you're naming whatever assistance features it is, but then also media. And getting back to that, if there's a crash and I've seen something where an article was a Tesla equipped with autopilot crashes. Well, they're all equipped with autopilot. It's standard, and actually autopilot wasn't even on. The driver wasn't using that when they crashed. But drivers have a problem with thinking and getting comfortable with using these features to drive the car. Mm-hmm. Level 2 autonomous driving requires the driver to maintain their attention to the road and be able to take back control from the vehicle at any point in an instant if it's needed. That's part of how level 2
Okay.
is written.
Okay.
So the features that you typically have are going to be advanced cruise control, where it adjusts speed and actually you can set a distance behind the vehicle in front of you. Lane keeping assist, even lane changing features are still level 2 autonomous driving. Level 3 gets into where the driver doesn't need to pay attention as much. It's kind of That's kind of where the dangerous area is, but we're not there yet. I mean, we're at very advanced level 2, but there isn't a manufacturer that you can go out there and buy a car and drive that car and have it safely drive you anywhere without you being required to pay attention. And that's one of the biggest criticisms Tesla gets versus like GM has Super Cruise. Well, they actually have a camera that monitors your eyes. If you take your eyes off the road, it will warn you, hey, pay attention. Tesla requires weight or just a little bit of torque applied to the steering wheel. Well, you don't have to pay attention to rest your hand on the steering wheel. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But once again, back to the media, if there's an accident and a vehicle is using some sort of a driver assistance software or feature, that's going to make the news more than some idiot is out there driving and gets in an accident. Yet, the statistics show that especially when you're using those driver assistance features, there are actually less accidents. It is actually safer than if you didn't have anything at all.
Okay. So there was a case where a woman, her car was self-driving, let's say, and basically she called for the car to come pick her up. So it pulled out of its parking spot, and
Okay.
anyway, an accident occurred in the parking lot. It wasn't major, but it was an accident. Who's at fault when something like that happens?
So I'm not familiar with that specific case.
Okay.
And so I can't speak directly to that, but the only vehicle that I'm aware of that has the capability of piloting in the way you're describing would be Tesla with what they're calling their summon feature, where you have your phone and
Yes,
you
is it.
press, you actually have a button on your phone, well, digital button, not a physical button,
Sure.
but digital button. You have to be pressing it for the car to move. You take your thumb or finger off of that, the vehicle stops. And it has to be within line of sight. And a public or a private area. It can't be on public roads. So in that case, without knowing too many details, I'd argue that the owner of the car that was is basically a remote controlled car at that point.
Yeah.
She was operating a remote control car and failed to do so safely. So I would place the blame on her.
Okay.
Big time. And honestly, from a legal aspect, to use that feature, Tesla has a warning on there. Like, from a legal aspect, Tesla is very protected against any accident because operators are still responsible. You're operating the vehicle, whether you're driving it or you're pressing a button on your phone to have it move. You're still responsible for what that car does.
Okay. Doesn't I thought Google had the self-driving vehicles where it's taking like the pictures of all the roads and the houses as it drives. Like there was a Google truck that came through our cul-de-sac here, just taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, there was no driver. Isn't that
Definitely a driver, and those are that they're taking pictures for Google Maps. So like
Yes.
when you're using Google Maps and you go out of satellite mode to the
Right.
street view, that's what you're looking at.
so? There is a driver.
Definitely a
Oh,
driver.
see, my understanding. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there is no company that has even legislative access to or been given permission to do that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm somewhat okay with that because the software, the technology isn't there yet. We aren't as positive and optimistic as Elon Musk and Tesla are, and they are very advanced. I mean, I don't want to knock them down too much, but they are very, very advanced. I've used their autopilot. I've used full self-driving, not the latest version because that's still they're still working on the beta for that. But it's incredible what it's capable of doing. But it still cannot replace a human driver in all situations.
Okay. Well, because I mean, I could see there's ethical questions involved here too.
Oh yeah.
For instance,
The trolley question, right?
The what?
The trolley question from an ethics standpoint.
I'm
Are you
sure-
familiar with that? Like
no.
where you can press a lever and you're either a trolley is like coming out of control and you have a lever that can change the course of the trolley to go on this track or that. On this one, it kills one person.
Yeah,
But if you don't,
that-
if you don't act, it'll kill 5 or whatever. Like what do you do?
Right. So and that is the question. So do you protect the driver or do you protect the bystander?
So I've given a lot of thought to this.
Oh, all right.
I have.
Let's-
And this was one of the questions that I had a few years ago when Tesla and their autopilot started coming out. I'm going, when we finally do get to a point where a vehicle is piloting itself, it's responsible for reacting to changes in environment and monitoring the environment. What, as a programmer, would you do? But then furthermore, if I'm in a vehicle, I want that vehicle to keep me safe in all conditions.
Okay.
I'm not going to buy a vehicle that's going to kill me at the expense of saving somebody else's life. I wouldn't do that, and I think most people wouldn't.
Okay.
Um,
Now a lot of people will say that they would choose that, but do you think that's they're
are they going to buy a car that would drive off a cliff instead of hit another car that's oncoming? The chance, like, give you certain death to avoid the chance of hurting somebody else. Like, there's many levels to that.
Okay.
So I think manufacturers have a responsibility to who they're selling the car to and who the occupants of the vehicles are. But ultimately, I think by the time we finally get to that, personal mobility will be a thing of the past, and we're probably going to just summon vehicles to come pick us up and drive us to wherever we go, and the vehicle will be owned by a company. But I mean, we're so far away from that
okay.
that
Okay.
it's important to ask the question, but we're not even at a place where we can have answers.
Well, I guess my feel personally is I would never give up control of my vehicle, and I'm a software engineer. I would never give up my control to software unless everybody had it and the cars were communicating with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way I would give it up because let's say a deer goes across the road.
Sure.
And there's a car that had to navigate around that. It can let the cars behind it know, hey, there's a deer just ran out on the road here, so that they can start monitoring ahead of time to make sure that they all slow down.
Communicating at like a flock of birds.
More or less, yeah, exactly. And I've spoken to a lot of different people who say they'll never buy an electric vehicle. These are some of the questions because I feel what Tesla did wrong when it came to marketing. They tied self-driving, or what I'm gonna call it self-driving.
Mm-hmm.
They tied self-driving to electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And I do know there are gasoline-powered vehicles that have a lot of
Absolutely.
those features in them. But when they tied it to the electric vehicle, an accident involving the self-driving features makes an electric vehicle look
Guilty
bad.
by association.
Exactly. Rather than keep the two separate. And I think that's what Tesla does wrong.
Well, in this country, electric vehicle is almost synonymous with Tesla. When I tell people, hey, I am an advocate for electric vehicles, they immediately go, oh, Tesla, blah, 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 Tesla this and Tesla. And I'm going, there's others. There's lots of others. There's so many other makes and models available, and more coming on the market that do not operate autonomously. But I mean, honestly, every new vehicle sold is going to have at least level 1 autonomous driving, because I don't know of very many vehicles these days that are being sold without cruise control.
Okay. And yeah, I was
Cruise
wondering-
control is a level 1 autonomous feature.
Okay. Uh,
Lane keeping assist. I find that on a lot of gas powered vehicles where it'll keep you in the lane or have emergency braking. Things like that are going to be level one autonomous
okay.
features.
I
So
actually, just in the past few days, I've seen a lot of cars that actually need those features. And
a lot of drivers
a lot
do.
of drivers, yeah.
There is, oh gosh, I don't know who I was talking with recently, but they were struggling because they tried to change lanes and the car was like pulling them back and beeping at them. Well, they had a lane keeping assist feature enabled that they didn't know about. So the car was fighting them to change lanes because it was like, hey, you're drifting out of the lane. Don't do this.
Okay.
Well, you can turn that off and then, you're fine. So I think a lot of it has to do with knowing the car that you're buying or that you own. What are you driving when you get into it? And you need to know. Unfortunately, the responsibility always falls on the person that is behind the wheel.
Hmm.
And I say unfortunately, but I guess if I think about it, it's really only unfortunate because of the people that are behind the wheel. But that is the world that we live in. We have to be able to trust people, and that a lot of the times means that people make mistakes and disasters happen. But ultimately, and I know you agree with this, that's much better than having some outside authority taking away the option for us to have that kind of control.
Yes, exactly. Which I want to throw this point out there. We need to wrap up here, but with Biden winning the election, or apparently winning the election so far, let's just go there. Uh, his whole thing is we are going to do away with fossil fuels by a certain date.
Mm-hmm.
He's really pushing for that, and part of that, the thing is with the amount of energy that we actually that comes from renewables, we're not even close. And I don't know. I actually forget where I was going with this, but with this big push, to me, that's going to displace a lot of people who currently work in the petroleum field, petroleum uh, industry. And then at the same time, uh, it's just basically saying, well, we're going to favor certain car manufacturers over other car manufacturers who aren't up to speed or whatever. So again, government picking and choosing who the winners and the losers are. Now, are you on the side of we need to do that because we need to, because of the environment, we need to get away from petroleum, or are you on the side of why not let the market decide, or which you used to be anyway, or where are you?
Personally, if it was just the environment, I'd say let the market decide. But that's because the environment isn't the biggest uh, concern that I have for looking for the future. By the time we destroy the world, I will be long dead. So that's a horrible thing to say, but I have other things that are more important that I focus on. When it comes to public health, air quality, the cost to continue the way we are, I wrote it down. So the American Lung Association, and I'm reading it because I wrote it down, says that a transition to EVs would actually help avoid more than $72 billion in public health costs. It would reduce asthma attacks, premature death, respiratory illness, lost work because of days being sick or lost wages. The effect that transitioning to electric vehicles has, or even renewable energy, because we'll tie that in as well, has such a positive effect for public health. We're already paying significantly. Now, to the jobs aspect, renewable energy is the number one growth for jobs in this country right now. It is growing faster than any other industry. So there are opportunities. I don't think that, well, this is the way we've done it and these people have jobs, so we have to protect their jobs. No, we don't. And I'm not saying put them in the unemployment line, but we don't have telephone operators anymore. We don't. We don't have people related to horses and transportation in that way,
No,
the way we used to. Now, yes, horses are a hobby, and there will always be gas powered cars in a hobby form. But the big thing that, from as far as electric vehicles, I mean, California, the Governor Newsom in California, it was a month or a couple months ago, said that an executive order. So it was not going through the legislature in that process. It was an executive order saying California will ban the sale of new gas and diesel powered vehicles by 2035. And they've actually bumped that up now to 2030. Do I think that's the right thing to do? Do I think he has the authority to do that? Yeah, I actually do. Because the cost to human health and human life is so significant if we just maintain the status quo. I want my kids to be able to live in a world where they can breathe easier. And I wish Michael were here, because when it comes to air quality and air pollution, it actually disproportionately affects minorities and impoverished communities at almost a rate of 2 to 3 times more than us white guys. Because we can live out away from the city in suburban areas or rural areas where it is a huge racial component to it as well. So I wish Michael was here. Maybe he and I can talk about that another time. I know you're watching. So, I'd love to talk to him about that more directly. But there is a massive crisis when it comes to public health directly tied to gas and diesel burning. In fact, here in Virginia, we are slowly switching over to electric school buses, which I think is fantastic. And if the federal government is going to help that happen faster, this is one of the and maybe the only reason I think that it's good for the federal government to be involved, because that can happen faster. There has been many studies that show that kids on school buses, riding on the school bus, are actually exposed to more exhaust emissions than people outside the school bus.
I remember as a kid, I smelled the diesel all the time.
And we can't just say, well, this is the way it is, so we're not going to change it. We have to change it. Why wouldn't we want to make a healthier population? I mean, if we're paying one way or the other, either we're paying to subsidize renewable energy and stop burning things, both in our power facilities as well as our transportation, we're paying for that with more subsidies than the renewable energy industry currently gets. And we're paying for that when it comes to the public health crisis and illness, respiratory and cardiac illness. That has a huge effect on the population of the country. So if we can take that money and channel that into the right direction to reduce, because we'll never eliminate it, but reduce that problem while giving people, and this is where the market comes in, a better product. EVs are better. Even if they weren't better, I probably wouldn't feel as strongly as I do when it comes to getting the government involved, because I hate the government. But they're a better product. So my belief in that better future is what's pushing this other belief that we need to get there as soon as possible. And I'm not quite at the point of saying no matter what it takes, but government is going to be involved in our lives, unfortunately, whether we want it or not. So if we can help tailor that involvement to ways that's going to improve our lives, then I think we owe it to each other and to the other people in our communities to be able to influence government in the right direction.
Okay. On that happy note, we're gonna close up. So where can we find you?
Right here. Kevin's house. No. So EV Resource can be found online. It's a digital company, pretty much, at ev-resource.com. If you guys have comments and you want to give feedback to me specifically, you can email me at hello@ev-resource.com. You can find us on YouTube, on Facebook. We've got a really, really healthy Facebook community. And I love having the conversation, even with people that I don't agree with 100%, or people that completely disagree with me. It's perfectly okay. Send me a message. I'm more than happy to engage in a civil disagreement.
Okay, and you can find Civil Disagreement on Facebook and YouTube under Civil Disagreement TV. And our website is civildisagreement.net. And that's where you can find us. Again, what we encourage you to do is share this with your friends, with your family, especially if they disagree with the kinds of things that we're talking about. Maybe they agree with me, disagree with Zach. Only we did agree on a lot of things today. But just be part of that conversation, and then leave comments with us. Not just comments, start a conversation on any of those places. We just love to have the discussion, help educate each other. On that note, anything else to add, Zach? I forgot your name.
How many more hours do we have? No, I guess that's all for now. But definitely, let's continue the conversation off camera, online, and I'd love to get everybody else's opinion. I want to hear from you guys as well for all of this, because I think we need to, and this is one of the things I love about what you guys are doing with Civil Disagreement. We need to have a place where we can have these conversations, because they are things that need to be talked about. They are absolutely, and this is one of them. I mean, the future of how we get from place to place, or it's important to be able to have that conversation.
Okay. And with that, we are out.
I'm just here chilling with my man K-Dog.